We hope that you've had a rich, insightful and worthwhile afternoon talking with all of the business schools. And we thought that we'd have some fun with this final session to sort of peek behind the curtain of admissions. And the idea that, of course, round one, round two, through to the next academic cycle, all of these admissions professionals are getting together and looking at strategy consultants on Monday and investment bankers on Tuesday, software engineers on Thursday. So you guys have been great. You've filled out lots of profiles that we've been through. We even have somebody that who didn't finish school. And where do they sit? How are they going to be viewed by the schools? So we've got a sort of a cross-section. And it's my pleasure to share the committee with Amy Philpott, who is the head of MBA admissions at Cambridge Judge, one of the top European business schools, with Jamie Young, who is the director of admissions at University of Toronto, Rotman, and my colleague Judith Hadara, who was at the Wharton School for 11 years and the admissions director at the end of that career. So we'll try to be as insightful. And John, I know you'd love us to be really punchy at the end. The gladiator moment, right? So I think the first one is, it's me that has the clicker, is the fast track consultant. Let's see if we can pull them up onto the screen. Here's our committee. And I should apologize, we were going to also be joined by Carla Cohen, who's a former Harvard Business School associate director, who had a health concern this afternoon, and we wish her well, and we'll do other sessions with her. So let's get started. Who do we have up first? Adam. We're working our way through the alphabet. We start with Adam, the fast track consultant, looking at school next year, all of the easy schools that he's looking to get into, with 4 years strategy consulting, worked his way up to a senior consultant role. What do we think of Adam? He has Wharton on the list. So Judith, maybe I can start with you and your sort of first response to international relations. Does he have a good enough quant track record for a school like Wharton?
Sure. Wow, I can hear my own voice. Hi, everybody. I'm glad to be here. And I really like Adam. I think Adam obviously has some really interesting work experience, both at BCG and also the international piece of his assignment in Germany. My concern with Adam is that I don't see the connection for the microfinance project in Rwanda, and I kind of am wondering how that plays back to what he's interested in doing in the long term. So he's had this really interesting experience as a co-founder of a social enterprise, but if he wants to go into private equity, I'm hoping to kind of understand where that connection is. And for better or for worse, Adam is not going to be alone in the Wharton pool. So there's going to be quite a number of individuals that are coming out with really strong undergrad. I don't see, he did very well at Tufts, clearly a school that's well recognized and in international relations, which is a little unusual. But my biggest concern or my word of advice for Adam would be, what is it about you that's going to help you kind of take yourself out of, I'm a consultant and I've had this international experience, and then really segueing into why private equity. So he's clearly admissible. I think that he for at least for Wharton, he would reach that bar. So I'm going to give him a thumbs up, but I would caution him. Double thumbs up, John. I would caution him that he's going to face about 150 other people that are going to have similar consultant profiles, strong undergrads, strong GMAT, and to really connect those dots. And maybe he's going to bring in something about social enterprise with the private equity piece, but I don't want that experience in Rwanda to just kind of be a standalone. And I'm curious about what you guys think.
Amy, if I can draw you towards the international experience that Adam has, and as we look at INSEAD, Cambridge, and the top European schools, I mean, that international piece really is in the DNA of the schools. Is it a prerequisite? I mean, is international experience more important than a 730 on the GMAT?
I mean, it's not a prerequisite. It's not the case that if you don't have it, you can't apply. but it's certainly something that we look for. But again, what I would say is it's not the case that if you've never lived in a different country for 6 months, then you can't apply. People can demonstrate international exposure in a number of ways. So it could be, for example, managing a diverse portfolio of international clients. So it's just demonstrating that you have that international perspective and that global outlook. It doesn't necessarily have to be that you are located in that country for a set period of time. So with his projects in Rwanda, I would be keen to know more about that. Did he spend time there? What was he actually doing? Because we have quite limited information about this.
Right. Jamie, if I can just draw you to one of the recommenders. So he's applying to HSW. He has a Harvard alum from McKinsey. He's at BCG, but we'll run with that. Getting a recommender from one of the business schools that you're applying to, a big plus, or can it undo you and Stanford turns around and says, yeah, he's HBS material, we're not going to look at him? Is that something that you look at in terms of who the recommender is and their affiliations with the school?
Yeah, well, you bring up a great point. I found that interesting when I saw Adam's profile. I thought, okay, so he spent 4 years at BCG.
But he's recommended somewhere else.
There now, but he's chosen, a recommender who's a partner at McKinsey. So naturally, I questioned, looking at the two recommenders in context, I said, okay, so we've got a Fortune 500 client, we've got a partner at McKinsey. Potentially, this is a profile. Adam is somebody who's hoping that, these recommenders are high profile, and that profile is going to impact the way that the admission committee, evaluates.
But you don't know if the partner at McKinsey used to be at BCG with him, right?
Correct.
So that's what I'm wondering. Like,
we would definitely want.
And this is the question, right? But initially, when I saw that, that's my sort of inkling, is to understand why he selected those people. Obviously, we want the strength of the recommendations to come from the caliber of what they're sharing with us. In particular, at the University of Toronto, I can tell you that we include a self-reflection question for candidates. So 3 to 5 words where they describe themselves, characteristics that best describe them. We ask the same thing of the recommender. And sometimes we're looking for that connection. So, without knowing more about Adam, these recommenders may or may not be able to really detail his experience well. To answer your question directly, I think at its peak or at its pinnacle, somebody who knows your school well, so an alum or somebody who's connected to the school, can very much lend some credence to the application, because they could speak, again, in detail to that candidate, but in the context of the school and the program, in a way that you would say adds value to that overall recommendation. But on the other side of things, the sort of the spectrum is broad here. They also might not be able to speak to the candidate's experience. And so, being an alum or being connected to the school might have no bearing, because they're not necessarily able to detail, what that person is going to bring to the school or bring to the program, for instance.
So you'd be looking at a substantive relationship there and make sure he's not just going for the guy in the corner office and their job title.
Exactly.
The gritty content of the recommendation for them. Okay. So, possible thumbs up from Judith. Is Adam a player?
John, your front row, just to intimidate here. Today you're gonna get a lot of these from me. A whole lot of it depends. I'd like to talk to Adam for sure. I'd certainly want to calibrate, some of these experiences. He's got some progression, across the GPA and the GMAT. There's some intellectual horsepower there. We want to get to know Adam on a much deeper level, but certainly he's off to a good start.
Great, good. Amy, anything to add on that one?
Yeah, I would second that. We would certainly be interested in talking to Adam and exploring maybe his career goals and his international experience a little bit more. But just on the basis of what we have here, we wouldn't be able to make a decision.
Good one to meet. Well, appointments will be made at the exit at the end of the day. All right, who's the next one up? Tori, who is working in the back office at where is she? At Liberty Mutual. So this one is good and local. And target schools perhaps reflected, some of the schools well known for their finance programs. So she's looking to make that transition to the front office or fintech, which of course is a very hot subject that business schools really want to be at the heart of. Strong GPA, is the GMAT where it needs to be for some of these top finance schools? What does you take? Jamie, how would you look at that GMAT score for this caliber of quant-focused schools?
Yeah, I certainly think that, anytime your GMAT starts with a 7, you're sort of in the conversation. I found it interesting when we got these profiles that we're not seeing the AWA, we're not seeing the integrated reasoning. And so, in this case, based on that split, and the quant score, IR would be something that we'd want to look at a little bit more, because it could show how this person's able to synthesize, that data. But it's not a concern at this stage for me.
Because integrated reasoning has been around now for 6 years, and you and other schools that you're talking with, that they're using it as one of the data points?
In our case, it's becoming increasingly relevant because we're able to leverage, again, that data set over those number of years to say, is this or is this not relevant for our admission decisions? We're at a point where in context we'll consider it, not at a point where we could say as a school that we've got a blanket statement or position on IR.
Right.
But to your question here, just looking at that particular split, I certainly want to see, how the IR score looks.
Right.
One of the challenges with IR to that point, though, and I'd share, is some candidates don't recognize how that's being used by schools.
Right.
So, let's imagine if Tori hadn't really considered the importance of IR, that low score may not be reflective of their ability, and that's one of the challenges that I think we have as business schools.
Got it. Amy, as we look at Tori's background in a bank, and she has this, women in finance, which, an industry that's really looking to improve that gender balance. And then we see that she's an accomplished pianist. If you have reached a level in sport, in creative arts, is that something that you pick up on as you're putting together the class?
I mean, we certainly look at the application as a whole, including extracurricular activities. We're looking for people who have an interesting and varied life outside of work. What we wouldn't want to see is just a pure list of activities. We would want to see actual accomplishments. It's not just, I turned up at this meeting. We want to know, did they lead an initiative? What did they actually do in that area where they were volunteering or something? It's not, we don't just want a list that doesn't give us any information about what they actually did and the input they had.
Right. And Judith, when you would see someone that has suddenly started volunteering, 2 months before applying to business school, realistically, how does that come across?
Somebody asked me that earlier today, whether or not it was worthwhile for them to dive in and start doing something now for a September application. And I said, schools are going to see that that's probably why you're doing it, and I advise against it. But in this case, you don't know when she actually started, or do you? I mean, if this is an ongoing thing for her, then I think that that's really important. And to me, it shows consistency. She has been involved with women in finance through BU. She's interested in helping young women that are thinking about, next steps in their professional and academic careers. So, to me, that was really telling. What's interesting to me about Tori is that there's not a lot of flash here. There's not necessarily, this is a local person, so Hancock Financial makes sense, but this is not necessarily, a big, it's not Goldman, it's not Bain, for example, but she's clearly making her way up through the ranks. And I would definitely want to talk with her, but I would also want to find out, as you mentioned, when did she actually start this volunteering? I guess I was a little more forgiving, and I was assuming it was something that she'd been doing for a while, as opposed to it just being something that she just started.
So 2 years at Liberty Mutual, 4 years at John Hancock. She's now an assistant VP. Is she on enough of a fast track to catch the attention of some of the top finance schools?
I'm going to say I'd like to interview her, but I don't know if she was going to ultimately make it through. I think I'd like to see what she's like in person, because I think that, obviously you can tell a lot more about someone's drive and determination, and I want to hear more about fintech from her. This is a little tricky because I'm seeing fintech, but I don't, what does that mean to her? Is there a connection? What's the, I'm going like this, what's the meat?
There's not really anything kind of substantial to show that she has the interest in this and the skills in fintech space.
Yes.
So it'd be good to talk to her more about that. And then obviously making that transition from back office to front office is challenging. So just finding out a little bit more about what her target roles are.
Exactly.
Well, one sense that I'm getting is perhaps for Tori, thumbs up, thumbs down. You talked about an interview.
Yeah, I would want to interview her, but to ask those kinds of questions. I wouldn't want to let her go because she's obviously performed pretty well. I really like the undergrad at BU. I think that says a lot about her. But I would want to ask her some of those more pointed questions.
Got it.
Yeah, there's a lot of great research on actually the brains of pianists. And especially somebody who's an accomplished, it seems, when it's saying, she's got this background in performance and actually how they think relative to their ability to create an authentic dialogue, to problem solve, to access the creative parts of their brains, and to think effectively. And so that strikes me right away when we see that. That's something that I will want to probe further on in the candidate, because it tells me something about them, and there's good research to tell me about how these people transfer into different roles, and maybe that transformative element of an MBA is something that really helps Tori tap into those things that make her special. But I really want to get into this communication and presence, because Tori's been working in these back office roles. We need to figure out if there's a reason why she's not been able to make that shift on her own.
This is why I'm asking the questions and you're providing the answers. I would have just thought it would be great for an evening with friends that she could play the piano. You're thinking about the left side of her brain and how that translates into
that.
a
That's
narrative.
really interesting.
That's wonderful.
To me.
Okay.
At our Christmas party, actually, one of our MBAs started playing the piano.
Yeah. And that's when you learned it about her. You hadn't picked it up in the application.
I hadn't. No, I wasn't aware of it. But one of my colleagues may have recruited her. But yeah.
Right. So schools care. They want to hear about that creative
for
side.
the Christmas party.
Right. So here's another local story: healthcare. And I think a lot of individuals have been talking to the schools about this one. Wharton with its HCM program, Duke similar sort of excellence in that field, and Yale, of course. So very clearly targeted. The schools that Susan is looking at, and having been on the sort of the patient side, healthcare provider, now at Mass Health, where might her career take her? Again, strong academic background with a GMAT of 680. Given the focus on healthcare, she really seems to know where she's coming from, where she's headed. I don't want these all to be about the GMAT, but this is a good profile, right? Where can Suzanne really shine? What does she need to share with Wharton, Duke, Yale to really sort of shine in this admissions process?
Well, I'll chime in and just say, the first place, I guess, that is sort of absent here is really, you think about these questions that sometimes we'll ask in admissions that are really trying to get to see the personality, but we don't know at this stage any of these extracurriculars or the things that really make, Suzanne interesting. So you asked Amy earlier about this idea of how important is international experience, and that global mindset, is something that, for instance, we aren't necessarily aware that Suzanne brings or has, and particularly when we think about, where healthcare is and different models there. Like I would certainly want to see a little bit more about her as an individual beyond, her academic background, her GPA in this case, and her GMAT. These things are all, from my perspective, they're solid. There's nothing here that would make me think that this candidate couldn't move further in the process, but equally, it's a competitive pool. And so there's probably somebody just like Suzanne who might be bringing more of that personality out. And so it's partly obviously because that's what we're looking at here in the profile. But I think that's the thing that I'm really looking forward to seeing in Suzanne is more about the person, more about the things that she likes to do, of course, outside of work, the extracurricular leadership, the impact that she's making in her community. All of those sorts of things would be areas that I think she could use to elevate and to boost her profile.
Right. So as you're looking at someone's resume, is it like, I want to see half on that sort of employment record, but this other half that really sort of shares, of course it talks about an academic record and they've got transcripts as well, but that's where we really start to get a sense of the individual, what drives them, what they're passionate about. Is it a half and half split? There's no set fixed rule for that. But,
yeah. Well, I think in terms of the physical presence, most schools have resume templates, and if I'm being fair, at least 3/4 of that template is on your professional experience.
Usually like that bottom piece. But that's the first thing I read, or I read. Is that those like 4 lines at the bottom. Who's your favorite soccer team, or what is it that you do on Sunday mornings, and those very specific, because that really, otherwise it's hard to differentiate, but that to me is like really giving us insight into who you are as an individual, and it's not just that you have hobbies, but there are things that you're really passionate about.
Yeah.
And for me, the essay questions are one of the most interesting parts of the application form, because you get to see who they are, who they are as a person.
Right.
Obviously, looking at the academics, the work experience, but actually what they have to say for themselves when they have this kind of free tech space.
Right. Looking at someone that's maybe got 3-4 years of professional experience in one institution, and then the last 6-9 months at a new employer, you understand, right, when it's too soon to ask your current employer, talking about business school. I mean, much as you'd like to see where they are today, you'd be happy for her to go back to that previous healthcare provider for recommendations?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we completely recognise that not everyone wants to tell their current manager or supervisor that they're looking to leave. They're worried that it maybe could limit their professional opportunities that are open to them. Obviously they don't know how it's going to be received. So yeah, I mean, in this circumstance, yeah, I would definitely see her reasoning for asking the former manager.
Got it. Great. So find out more about the extracurriculars, but encouraging that healthcare focus.
I'm incredibly neutral. I don't really like the VC piece, to be honest. Like, that's kind of out of nowhere with this. And I would say to Suzanne, let's see the healthcare piece. Let's see what you want to do with it. What are you missing? You have a BA in psychology. Like, I'm trying to connect the dots. And I'm afraid that if she goes and talks about VC, it's kind of out in the atmosphere. But healthcare, to me, there's a believable path. So I'm actually not even sure why VC is on there, to tell you the truth.
Okay.
So I would say to her, let's see the healthcare piece. And you should look at Vanderbilt, because that's another, thanks, John. Right. Vanderbilt is a great school for healthcare. So that could be, these are very big leagues, and I don't know if she's necessarily ready to be there, but there are certainly other programs that would be great fits for her.
Right. And just for my purposes, admissions committee, are these the sort of discussions you guys are having, where you're saying, I don't know what a motive is, or I'm nervous about this post-MBA career goal? It is 4, 5, 6 of you sitting around having these sort of discussions?
Almost 10 at the University of Toronto, including our Director of Careers. And so certainly there's an element where we're looking at, what is the probability, not possibility, but what is the probability of the career outcome? But equally, we recognize that most candidates who come into our programs, they're making that double switch or triple switch, right? So industry, function, and location in many cases. And we also recognize that having gone through thousands and thousands and thousands and years of applicants, that often candidates will mask a part of themselves in the application process to try to become more believable.
Right.
So I could see Suzanne doing exactly what you said, sort of saying, I'm not going to talk about this VC thing because I know how challenging that is and how notoriously difficult it is to go forward to that path. We might actually like that comes up in the process. We would certainly look for in the interview to see how she thought about approaching that.
Right.
And to understand as a person, is she somebody who thinks that through and has made some connections, has networked, has had some conversations, has a sense of maybe how challenging that would be based on her profile, and that would show us that this is somebody who's very thoughtful, they've engaged, they've networked, so you could see all these other positives coming out of potentially something like that doesn't seem to fit in her profile. So we would have those conversations, but I think it's important for candidates to recognize that we know a lot of things are going to change between the application and the time that you graduate, and so we're not simply looking at it to say, all right, Suzanne said she's going to go into healthcare, and if she wants to major in innovation and entrepreneurship, we're going to say, I don't know, that's not what you put on your application. We have a much broader aperture.
We do have a lot more information on individuals than this.
Right.
So that shapes the conversations that we have.
And they're going to spend 1 or 2 incredible years with a very ambitious, diverse, open-minded, talented bunch of classmates, and could go in so many directions.
Anjani Jain, who was on the panel earlier, when he was at Wharton, he famously said, I will never forget this, if we told everybody that they had to do what they said in their application in order to get their diploma, nobody would ever graduate. It's really funny. I was like, that is brilliant and very true. So I don't know if he's still here, but people, that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
So Suzanne networks heavily with these schools, really defines what those healthcare goals might be, and that sort of trajectory that she's on, and then she might be a keeper. Okay, who do we have after Suzanne? Charles, global energy, right? As oil hits $78 a barrel, we've seen in the last 3 years a lot of people from oil and gas applying to business school as the industry tanked. Now it's picking up again. But there's a whole renewable story that schools like Haas, Sloan, Stanford obviously connect with. So his career spread across Bain and Accenture, but he actually, in the oil sector, wants to go back to strategy consulting. Is that okay? I mean, that you're not using business school to, we talked about the triple jump, but Charles obviously likes his life in strategy consulting and wants to go back to that. Is that something good, or do we feel like we're missing something memorable? Jamie, if you shared something like that with the schools.
Well, I'd have a hard time positioning it as, is it good or is it not? I mean, it certainly, again, it sort of fits that profile of everything about that is believable, right? It seems like he'd have a pretty good understanding of what it would take to, have that post-MBA career and how the hiring process works, and in fact would be well networked in the space. I could see him, in a lot of ways being a good fit there. So I think that's okay in that sense.
And of course, the value of an MBA isn't just to make a career switch. There's plenty, there's a lot to be gained from the experience as a whole. So, it's perfectly believable that he has his own reasons for wanting to undertake a program.
Right. Unusually for somebody within that space, his boss is not too hot on the MBA. I mean, we more often see that in sort of in big oil.
I was going to say that that is such a big oil thing that they're like, you don't need to make your way up through Exxon or Texaco or whatever, Schlumberger. It's almost like this. It's a very, what's the word I'm looking? It's like a family. And like the dads and grandpas and the grandmothers don't like it when you try to leave the family because I did it this way and you can do it this way.
Right.
So that's really interesting to me that you have somebody, if he's currently at Accenture, that's not very supportive.
So working with a recommender who's negative about the MBA, they're not negative about Charles,
no,
but about going to business school. Can a recommender doesn't have to believe in business school, but can believe in the person. Is that something that you can navigate and get beyond, and the admissions committee would understand that?
I mean, do we think his recommender is going to? Do we think that his feelings about the MBA are going to influence the way he writes the recommendation? I suppose that's the key. That's the key thing, and I suppose that's for Charles to figure out. Really, he needs to decide whether he wants to use his boss as a recommender, because if he feels like that his opinions on the MBA are going to colour the recommendation letter, then that's obviously that's not great for Charles. So I would, if that's the case, he could maybe think about asking an alternative recommender.
Right. Jamie, I'm going to just steer you towards extracurriculars. So Toastmasters. Who knows if he shows up on the third Thursday of every month. Lots of mentoring. We see a lot of it in Inner City, or Big Brother, Big Sister is one of the more familiar ones. What would you be looking at in terms of mentoring and what it says about classroom participation and working with your classmates? But also, Big Brother, Big Sister, the degree of commitment and the impact that you've had with that organization. How can we make sure extracurriculars really stand out?
Yeah, it's really the exact same thought pattern that you've sort of launched there, which is sort of scale and scope, right? Beyond the, if you will, checking the box. And that, I've been engaged with Toastmasters or Big Brother, Big Sisters, and so most MBA, I would argue, MBA admissions people know of those organizations. They'll be familiar with fundamentally what the person is sort of signaling. But because we see it so frequently, for it to become meaningful, we'll really want to understand, why those organizations for you, and what is the scale of your engagement, or what is the scope of your impact at those places. If Big Brother, Big Sister showed up, in the winter of 2018, and we're starting in fall 2019, is that really something that we want to consider in a meaningful way? Versus, is it something that he started? This is somebody who's got 11 years almost from the time that they graduated. So if it's an 11-year engagement, that mentorship is quite meaningful to this person, I would imagine. And for them to have been that consistent over that period of time, I'm venturing to say that in the interview, we're going to see something that's some determination, some perseverance, some resilience, some things there in Charles where we say, okay, this person is, somebody who can commit to something and really, continue with that to the point where they see it through to making an impact.
Right. So if Charles is in his early 30s, let's imagine he came out of school 10 years ago, perhaps he has a master's degree beyond his chemical engineering. Anything that you'd really point to, Amy and Judith, in terms of the over 30s applying to business school?
I would. I'm also trying to figure out the math here.
Yeah, we have a lot of missing information about his career path. Because he graduated in 2008. But
so there are like 4 missing years.
Right, we've got Bain, Accenture, so there must be...
We've got 6 years of work.
Maybe grad school as they came out of BU.
Or jail time, hard to tell.
So I think this does bring up an important point about gaps on the CV,
right.
Which I think that it's always best to just provide, be honest. If you do have gaps in the CV, just be honest, provide the reason, the explanation. It's more kind of... It's harder for us if there's no information, because we just have to. We just don't have anything to base our our assumptions on.
Right.
Whereas if they actually most people have a gap, have a genuine reason for it, and so it's just good to be honest, and then we can make an informed decision.
Yep. You always talk about, otherwise you guys imagine the train wreck, right, of what
course.
Might have filled those gaps.
If you don't tell admissions, they're going to make it up, and you don't want them to make it up.
It's worst case. Yeah, you think worst case scenario. There's a lot of genuine and completely plausible reasons why people have a gap, and it doesn't harm the application.
Right.
Yeah.
He's going to struggle, isn't he, Charles?
Because of his...
With Sloan, Haas, the GSB?
So I'm interested in those school choices, and I'm also really interested in the... You sort of talk about him being a global energy hybrid, and I see the chemical engineering, but I don't know what he's been doing. Has he been what has he been doing at Bain? Like, has he been in a specific division with them? You had asked about being over 30. Honestly, he's going to have to make a pretty good play for why he's going now.
Right.
So what are the really definitive skill sets that you feel at that age? And it's not about an age as much as it's years of experience. So you can be... at that point in your career, schools want to make sure that you're still going to be able to get something out of being with them. Are you better off in an executive program, for example, where you may be with peers that have had that kind of experience? I think that it's a big adventure and a big investment for him. And what does he expect his outcomes to be? So I would like to talk with him and maybe give him a little bit of advice along those ways. I mean, I like what I'm seeing, but is he admissible? Yes, he's admissible. Especially, the chemical engineers or anybody in engineering tends to be, they're really ready, as far as the quantitative section goes. I would never doubt that, even with the 74th percentile on the quant, which is a little light, slightly. But what he's done is with chemical engineering. But I think that talking with him, even before the interview stage, would be really helpful to kind of understand, why are you going now? What are the skills that you're looking to get, and where do you eventually hope to go? You said strategy consulting, but again, because of the layout of this, we're not exactly sure what's in his brain.
What the gaps or the master's programs might be. Okay, so we're hesitant on Charles. What have we got now? Ramesh. Ramesh, the Indian male engineer, and business schools see plenty of them. That's the reality for this part of the applicant pool, and certainly ambitious in the schools that he's targeting. Working in biotech, and also has a research background at Harvard Medical School. So BITS, whether it's the IIT, as we look at that market of the IITs, the NITs, University of Delhi, Pilani, Osmania University, and so on, is there a pecking order in your minds? I mean, some of these schools are unbelievably selective to get into.
Right.
Do you say, okay, we start with the IITs and we work our way down, or how much does the Indian institution that you graduate from then sort of color next steps in your assessment?
I suppose one way of thinking about it is to say, so if Ramesh was applying and he just graduated, your question about pecking order becomes a little bit more important, in the sense that based on the information that we have, this is far more substantial given the point in time at which they're applying. And then you can see how that gets carried through. So, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years after graduation, the things that you've done over the last number of years maybe start to balance out if it wasn't a school that was perhaps considered to be the most selective as an undergraduate institution.
Right.
When you're coming to an MBA program, if you're 27, 28, 29, 30 years old, whatever it might be, that I think to overstate or to overrepresent the value on the decision you made when you were 17 or 18 on going to school could potentially be a flaw. And so I think the earlier you are in your career, the sooner you're applying, perhaps it could have a little bit more importance.
Right.
But generally speaking, I think that we're also holistic in the way that we think about admissions, that it's hard for me to tell you honestly, or to suggest that going to a school that isn't considered to be at the top of that pecking order would inhibit your opportunity at a school.
Okay. Now, one of the schools that was with us today, 23.5% of their applicants are from this Indian pool, many of them male engineers. And the typical GMAT average at that school for that demographic is about 30 points higher than the overall average. So you look at a 710, I mean, without even thinking about Stanford, 737, Haas must be 726, Sloan 720 some, we could check, I guess, and Duke are around that 700 level. Can an Indian male engineer apply with a 710 and get away with it? Or does Ramesh have to take the GMAT again? Judith, any thoughts on?
Yeah, I'm smiling. I think that I'm really interested in the research association. Excuse me, who's a research associate at Harvard, and I think that says a lot about him. In addition to the work that he's doing with Cambridge Biotech, so it is all relative. I would never throw out a 710 just because, or I would never throw out a BITS just like that. I think that these are all, and that's what's so hard for people to understand, is that it is a conversation. We really did and do sit around and talk about what are they bringing to the table? What are we giving them? What are they bringing us? And what is this community that we're building going to look like? So I think that in the chat rooms in particular, sometimes there's a sense like, I need this number, and I'm from this demographic, and I really need this number. But there's so much conversation that goes on that I think that sometimes gets lost, and that is really why admissions officers don't do things just by the numbers. So I find him actually pretty compelling, and I would like to talk with him, and I would never say we're not going to look at him because of the 710.
And we've talked about schools being concerned about, obviously, post-MBA career opportunities. He already has an H-1B visa that presumably was either tied to his time at NYU and his master's degree, or the current employer. Having a green card as an international applicant, having a visa and perhaps easier to stay. Canada has a more tolerant immigration policy. Maybe we'll stick at that. Do you look at an individual's ability to then stay in the country, post-Brexit, in Trump's America or in Trudeau's Canada? How important might a visa like that or a green card be to Ramesh's prospects?
So that wouldn't be a factor in our decision making, because not everyone wants to stay in the UK. Our students come from a really diverse range of backgrounds, and similarly they go on to work in a really diverse range of locations. So some people will want to go back to where they were living before, some people will want to go somewhere completely different. So to kind of judge the application on their UK immigration status wouldn't really make sense for us.
Okay, right. That's encouraging.
Yeah, in our case, it's to pick up on that. It certainly doesn't make sense for us. All graduates of our 2-year full-time MBA program are given a 3-year work permit. And so in that sense, we've really got no concerns on a candidate's ability. We know, in fact, that it's not only possible or probable, that it's fully guaranteed. And so I think, what we love about that is that not only for us, but equally for candidates, they have peace of mind in knowing that should they choose to pursue a career in Toronto or in Canada following graduation, they can really make their most virtuous choice on company and role and throughout their MBA experience, that they're not necessarily looking for sponsorship or any of these other types of things to ensure that they can really, fulfill what they felt was the value of their MBA in their post-career.
Right. And if you think about the caliber of the graduates of the world's top business schools and what they can bring to a community, to an economy, go Canada. What a great policy, right?
So it's not as generous as Canada, but in the UK, Cambridge is part of the UK Tier 4 visa pilot scheme, which means that the graduates from our MBA program get 6 months additional time on their visa after the course is finished, which is just quite a significant amount of time to continue finalising their post-MBA employment.
Job search and everything.
Yeah,
Great.
exactly.
So here we have Emily, the newbie. Now she's graduated last summer. and now with Deloitte, already thinking about business school. Are top 10 business schools, the world's top schools, going to look at, I mean, they all want to build that pipeline of talented young women into their MBA programs, but she's a year out of school, 2 years by the time she might apply next year. Would you be strongly encouraging her to wait an extra year and come in with 3 years of experience?
Yeah.
Can I add a question, which is...
I'm doing the math, yeah.
We don't know what her job is either. We just know she's at Deloitte. We don't know what she's doing.
The role that she has, right? She could be on the accounting audit side or consulting side.
Yeah, has she had any career progression yet? It's not necessarily about the number of years of work experience. Obviously, our minimum requirement is 3, so you have to have that. But it's about what you've done in that time. What have you accomplished? What has your impact been? So for her at this stage, we just don't know.
And that calculation is post-undergrad. It's not, well, she did, took a year between second and third year in undergrad, and that clock really starts to count from when you come out of school.
And it's a big investment. I don't quite know what Emily wants to get out of the MBA, but I'm hoping that she would work for another year and start to figure it out. I mean, it's you're out of the workforce, you are investing, you might be moving. There's a lot of things that go on for anybody, and I think that I would want to say to her, like, why are you doing this? Are you doing this because you think you should? Are you doing this because you don't like your job?
Yeah, it feels like it could be an escape.
Yeah,
it has that kind of.
And if you don't like your job, go find something else to do. And it's not unusual. Today, there are a lot of people that are just starting out on the process, and I love talking to people early in this because you can really talk about, well, what are you thinking about, and what are some ways that you can talk to your supervisors about building leadership? Can you take on some additional projects? What do you like to do outside of work? This to me is actually a beautiful canvas to start with, but I would say to her, you need at least another year, and please don't apply until a year from now. You're very unformed, and I don't know what you were going to say. You were going to say something earlier about her.
Well, my question was really, again, there's a lot of people who work at Deloitte.
Right.
They're a wonderful company, and sort of what is she? So the question that Amy asked, to your point, you mentioned 3 years being the requirement for your school. We have a recommendation, and so I would just add, and it's not so much to Emily as much as a slight counterweight to say it's a recommendation from us and not a rule, and for a particular reason. I think every time that I've ever established a hard and fast rule, the very next day I wake up and I meet the person who's got a year and a half or a year and 3/4 or 1 year and 11 months of full-time work experience, and they're just a game changer. And I think it's better to have a recommendation. So if you look at a class profile, it would suggest that very, very few people actually are the exception to what would be a rule. But we're pretty, for us, it's very important to speak in terms of recommendations, because Emily very much could be somebody who is a rule breaker by way of something that makes her exceptional, and perhaps not. Statistically, we're going to recommend, just as you've mentioned, a few more years so that she can show up in the classroom as somebody who's really got an in-depth experience that she's able to contribute to her teams when she's collaborating throughout the program. Yeah.
Now, my rule is to never break Ingrid's rules, and she said we needed to wrap up. And we still
Can I talk about the GRE for a hot second? Okay, so I got a lot of questions today about the GRE and how do schools look at it, and is it valid, and it's becoming much more accepted without question across the schools. And I tell people, when you're just starting out, like Emily is, take both. Take a gut check and see, take them blind and see how you feel, what you feel more comfortable with, and then I typically say you'll kind of, one of them will feel more comfortable for you. It feels more intuitive, or you're more comfortable with the way the exam is given, and then plan on taking it at least twice, because you can't expect to go in, take the exam, ace it, and be done. There's a lot of other things that come into play on the day that you're actually taking the exam. So the GRE, things have changed a great deal in the ways that it's being considered, but I always say don't go in expecting that you're going to have a very different experience with both of them. And so there are lots of ways that you can practice them online, and that for me, just seeing the GRE, I wanted to bring that point up because I do think it's important that not everybody takes the GMAT, and it's perfectly accepted.
And US News doesn't use the GRE yet, so there's more freedom sometimes working with that test. Great. There's Arjun, there's Daniel, there's Anonymous.
Do Anonymous.
We just tried to sort of pick as many as we could. Poets and Quants is a phenomenal community in terms of the degree of advice, questions that you can ask. And John, you'd certainly support this idea of reaching out with your profile, your questions. I think that Jamie and Amy are a great example of a business school community that has incredible insight, incredible experience, and is more than willing to share that with you. And then a shout out for Judith and the team at Fortuna. It's 34 former top 10 admissions officers with the sort of experience that you've shared. So with all of these stories, come onto the Poets site, reach out to Fortuna, and talk to the schools. That really comes across because you're very generous in your guidance and advice. Thank you for being so generous and sharing the last 50 minutes, whatever it was, on stage with us. And I hope it was valuable to all of you, and that you'll stay for a drink. And
yeah, definitely
good
stay
luck
for a
with
drink.
next steps. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.